spoke to everybody. So. So this is our speaking orders.
For the county, it's really about public safety, and then really, as something I've been involved with the last 31 years, via the fire service, working with the Police Chiefs Association and the sheriff for many years. Public safety is critical, and that's really what this is about. We're jeopardizing public safety when we start to release people, and they come back in within 24 hours or a short period of time and committing crimes again. And it's all been discussed, even in the few minutes here. What if you let somebody's out on a felony DWI and they go out and kill somebody later that evening, or instance now people are going to be a little bit so rude and brazen as, give me my ticket, I need to be on my way. So they're really, I don't think we're going to be holding people accountable, and I think this is something that was just done in haste. I think it needs to be reevaluated. I know we spoke about this at NISAC, and it's a growing concern with everybody across New York State. So I think the governor needs to do his due diligence and the support of Senator Borrello and other senators to really push this home and get everybody to look at it, and do their due diligence and make sure we're making the right decisions.
And you haven't seen any impact just yet in this county?
No, we haven't seen any numbers just yet. There's differing opinions right now. We may or may not see numbers, but I think right now Chief Snellings made a point that they have 107 no-shows in court. I think that's indicative of what's going to happen, and it may spike and it may go back down. But the bottom line is, in that spike, what's going to happen? Will somebody be injured? Will somebody die? Will something happen? Those are concerns we all have, and we need to make sure that those concerns are dealt with and taken care of, and make sure the public is safe.
I haven't asked this of the policeman, but what is Cuomo's motivation in this quick reform bill?
A lot of it, I believe, is driven from downstate. As we talk to some of the sheriffs that live in other parts of the state, some of the charges and so forth that were considered, they're considered, it's the same charge, but it has a different bearing up here in the north than it does down in New York City. There was one instance they talk about burglary, and burglary is, if there's an assault in New York City, they add burglary to it because you're into the person's home or their apartment complex. Up here, burglary is your home. We don't have the apartment complexes, at least in Chautauqua County, like you do downstate. So those additional charges, they add burglary on as a charge, whereas in New York State, upstate, it's a little bit more of a serious crime and a charge in and of itself. So when you blanket the same, that you blanket the dismissal across the board, that's not helpful. I mean, it's there's different instances in both sides. So I think just that blanket, it's gonna be the same from New York City to Chautauqua County, from Watertown down to the city again. That makes no sense. We're not all the same. We have different areas, different jurisdictions, and we need to realize that there is more outside of New York State than New York City, and the governor needs to realize that this impacts more than just the city, more than just a big voter base. It involves the rest of the state, and it needs to be taken care of. If you're going to make a law, you're going to make a change, you start from top to bottom. You get a consortium of individuals. You listen to your state senate from north, south, east, and west. You get everybody together, and prevailing heads, and bipartisan, get everybody to look at this. This has been driven by the governor and his agenda, and there really was no consideration from anybody else in the state. And it's unfortunate because elsewhere outside of New York City, this is a big problem. And I'm sure you're going to hear about it from Allegheny County, Chautauqua County, Cattaraugus County, that these problems are growing, and they're just going to continue. They'll tell you that they may have tried something in New York City where it's, I was told cashless bail has been implemented already. That's New York City. It's not the rest of the state. And there are reasons for, without bail, as far as misdemeanors, especially. There's a problem that I was concerned with. I chaired the Criminal Justice Council in Chautauqua County, so we were always looking at those people in for long periods of time on small bails because they just couldn't pay it. It might as well have been $1 million. If you can't pay $200, it could have been $1 million. You still weren't going to be able to pay it. But having said that, these felony convictions need to be remanded. They need to have, judges have been elected for their discretion, the judiciary discretion, and we need to give that power back to them because right now they don't have it and the governor's taking it away.
And the courts have to issue these warrants, apparently, so that's going to be a huge burden.
Correct. And again, we have 36 courts in Chautauqua County, so each one is going to have to come back and reevaluate. It's a great deal of work for something that really pertains, if the concern was downstate, then deal with their downstate concern. Upstate, I think there were some things that we needed to look at, but again, that Criminal Justice Coordinating Council I was chairing, at no time did anybody ask us what were some thoughts or considerations as to what we felt might be impactful to reduce, the population diversion of jail, inmates, and we all said that, misdemeanors, bail and misdemeanor charges was something that we could look at, but not, felony charges. I don't think any felony charge should ever be, left without bail. But it should be the discretion of the judge. I'm not a judge. I can't speak for them, but we need to give them that discretion to make sure they make the right decisions. But to take it away from them, it really wasn't the right thing to do.
It's great to see George Borrello hit the ground running, doesn't it?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, George, he was a mover and a shaker in Chautauqua County, and we feel real confident he's going to do the same. He and I talk almost daily sometimes, because things that he had started, things I'm initiating on my own. So it's a great face to see. He and Assemblyman Wendell have been huge, assets, and they've been great for the community. But myself personally, they both reached out, and we've had a great working relationship with the three of us. So we want to continue that. But to see George doing this is really it's really inspiring. Yeah.
Statewide recognition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Swanson, District Attorney, Chautauqua County.
And what's your take on the reform bill that the governor's pushed through?
I think the reform bill needs work. I think there needs to be some stepping back, a review of what's in place. We're beginning to see the collateral effects of what was passed, and I think at some point there needs to be an honest debate on whether or not this is working for the people of our state. My hope is that that task will be taken up, and that we see some changes to it. I don't think that many of the people you're going to hear from today are going to say our system was perfect. But what I do think is that you'll hear from people that say reform could have been accomplished on the bail front responsibly, reasonably, if all sides would have been heard, and I don't know that happened. So the bill we have, the resulting effects of the bill we have, are beginning to be seen. I think the concerns that were raised by the Sheriff's Association, the DA's Association, and the Chiefs of Police Association, I think, are coming to fruition. And I think the concern is a reality at this point. And I hope there's a look at this to try and remedy some of the issues created.
And what was the motivation in pushing this thing through so fast? Do you think?
I don't. I know for a number of years these reforms were discussed. There was a criminal justice task force that put out some recommendations on this back in 2017. Those reforms that were pushed by that group, I think, would have been received a little bit better. Why that task force recommendations weren't followed is beyond me. It was from a group of folks that were from all sides of the table and all parts of the criminal justice system. And I think it would have been something that I think everyone would have been pleased with in some way. Unfortunately, we're here today to talk about keeping our community safe, and you see the folks tasked with that job are all here voicing their concern. So,
what kind of burden is it going to put on the serving of all these summons that have to be on the court?
An extreme burden, and I hail from a slightly smaller county, and I know our local police forces are all taxed as it is with their budgets and their staffing levels. And my concern is that we're going to be pulling officers off the street to serve warrants to find folks on relatively minor offenses who are just not coming to court. So, there's a real undertone of public safety concern throughout the new changes. I mean, it touches the discovery reform, it touches the bail reform, and my hope is that some of those new policies or new laws will be rolled back a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
So far on Jamestown?
Well, one of the things that we've discussed recently, and I think you've seen in our local media, is from an operational standpoint, I've had to take an officer out of patrol, promote him, and put him into our investigative section to help process our digital evidence, because we do. There's a lot of digital evidence, body cam, but we also have a holding facility. So within our city jail, we're also required to provide video within the booking area. So from that standpoint, it's forced me to take an officer off the road and put him into a different position to deal with the requirements with discovery. The other night I was asked in City Council how many people haven't appeared in court, and we've been tracking that, and so that's another increase. Now we have For example, we had 119 failure to appear warrants issued. So we're seeing an increase in that. But again, it's kind of early to tell, as far as crime rates go. That's why I haven't discussed that. I think it's too early to determine that. But I think you've seen some examples across the state where they've attributed the bail reform or the criminal justice reform bill as a result of the causation of some of these incidents.
What kind of impact has it had on the jails in Jamestown, the jail?
Well, I mean, our city jail, we were expecting to see less, but every morning when I come in, there's always someone in jail, 2, 3, 4. Again, the rules are a little different for us. We can still hold. We can hold people that are charged with domestic violence crimes, and we can also hold for individuals that have been charged with felonies all the way to D felonies. But then once they get arraigned by the judge, depending on the charge, they're released.
And you have to send out a warrant. That's much more work, isn't it, for you?
Well, we don't. The courts do.
The courts do.
Yes.
So the court has that capacity.
Correct.
To issue those. Isn't that a lot of burden on them?
Well, I think I'll leave that up to the courts to answer. I mean, we can assume that. One of the new requirements for us is when we issue appearance tickets, we actually have to ask the defendant on how they want to be contacted. So we actually, we take that information, whether it's by phone, text message, or email.
It's extremely important. We're concerned about public safety throughout our communities in Chautauqua County, specifically here. That's why we're here. But I think across the state, we have legislation that was passed, and without really consulting the experts and the people out in the field, I don't think there's many of us that disagree that we needed some bail reform and some reform in the criminal justice system. But it seems that we went the complete 180 degrees and with a pendulum.
How much law enforcement was involved in making the decision, the reform bill?
Very little, if any. I'm not aware of any organizations that were consulted with or discussed with. Perhaps individual officers may have talked or individual attorneys, but as far as the State Chiefs Association, the State Sheriff's Association really had no impact or comment on that.
What kind of impact do you think, or have you seen so far in Chautauqua as a result of this reform bill?
At this time, it's kind of a little early to see. I know in the city of Jamestown, they've had an increase in the amount of failure to appear warrants and bench warrants. In the county, because many of our town courts, they don't convene on a daily basis. We haven't seen an increase in warrants, but we are expecting to see later on in the year, because many of the courts are currently, where they have a no-show or failure to appear, they're reaching out to the defendants to let them know that they have to appear at a different time, and which is a problem because many of these people are showing no accountability. And that's what this law has done, is taken away the need for accountability for offenders.
What kind of effect has it had on the jail so far in terms of release?
Jail population is down. In Chautauqua County, our jail population is down about 85 people, which ends up being about a 35% decrease in population.
And that's a result of this reform bill?
We're not 100% sure, but much of it is as a result of the bail reform.
And what kind of effect do you think this event will have across the state? How quickly will this change policy?
I have no idea how quick the policy will be changed. Hopefully what we'll get out here is that the public will be aware of what's going on and to recognize the need and hopefully put the pressure on their local assemblymen and senators to change this law.
What kind of importance is the defense? What kind of statements are they making in favor of this particular reform?
Well, defense is looking at, the comment or the logic we've heard is we don't want to be locking people up because they can't afford to be out. They're looking for fairness, I believe, but we're looking at this public safety, and we need to see the judges have some discretion in being able to evaluate the safety for their communities.
We are going to move around the state. Syracuse is likely our next stop. We're going to go down to Long Island, Staten Island, other places. What we did here today was unique in the sense that when this law was passed, entirely by the Democrats in the Senate and the Assembly, they did none of this. They included it in the budget, and as a former county executive, I think it's irresponsible to do policy as part of your budget when you're supposed to be discussing numbers. And also, there was no public hearings. Nothing like this occurred in the creation of New York State's so-called bail reform laws. So we are getting input from a cross-section of people. You'll see nobody was censored. I'm appreciative that everybody was polite, but we had probably the longest testimony was from a defense attorney. And reality is, if anything, we should really be skewing to the side of the members of law enforcement and victims' rights advocates, because they were completely unheard. It was the special interest groups that are pushing for this radical bail reform that were the only ones that were listened to by the Democrats in the state legislature. So really, we need to hear more from the people on the front lines, from the people that are our law enforcement officials, our district attorneys, our probation officers, and the victims. Those are the people we need to hear from, because they were completely ignored in the creation of this law. And I know that they want to talk about, that, well, it's too soon to tell. But let me say this. We need to repeal bail reform and do something responsible in its place. Because, yes, there should be justice for those small number of people that are held unjustly. But when you have a disaster on your hands, like bail reform, we need to repeal it now and start over again. You look at, to use an analogy, when the 737 MAX, when that aircraft was found to be dangerous and we had tragedies. Did anyone at the FAA say, you know what, we don't have enough data, we've only had one crash. Did we not have enough data to determine whether or not, let's wait for a few more incidents to happen, and then we'll talk about grounding the aircraft? No, that's not what happened. What happened was they said we need to ground the aircraft and listen to the people on the front lines, the pilots that are telling us there's a flaw in the software programming that's causing these problems, and they grounded those aircraft because of safety reasons. We should be repealing bail reform for the exact same reason, because people are dying already a month into it, and if you want to have responsible conversations about true bail reform, let's do it without having to sacrifice any more lives or sacrifice the safety and quality of life for our citizens.
Are you getting good bipartisan support for this, or?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think you'll see here today, these were, despite some accusations that this is some kind of Republican plot, who was here? But our district attorney, Patrick Swanson, who is a Democrat and who has been a very vocal opponent of these laws. You had people that from throughout the state, people that I have spoken to from all walks of life, parties, variety of party affiliations and no party affiliation, that are outraged by what's happening right now. And so it is a small, select group of people who believe that, as they've said here, that this is somehow motivated by racism or money, that believe that essentially these things are good. I asked straight up the question to that defense attorney, do you think that there are any changes are needed? And he said no. I mean, essentially he said he thinks this law is perfect. Tell that to the victims that have suffered needlessly, and even talk to people, the families of the people who have died as a result of this irresponsible law continuing on. And honestly, in our state legislature, there are many Democrats who have been silenced by their leadership, who have actually put forth proposals to reform the laws, and they have been silenced, locked up in committees, or not even brought forth at all. We, on our first full day of session, we brought forth an amendment to the bail reform law calling for its repeal. And despite the Democrats that told us that they supported the idea, not a single one of them voted for it, not a single one. So they can talk out of their one side of their mouth, but their actions are what you need to judge them on. And the actions are, they are staying united, whether it's through intimidation or fear of reprisal from these radical groups that support this, but they are not stepping up. And people are dying. That's not fear-mongering, it's fact.
One other question. Oh, yeah. I didn't hear any kind of discussion of the punitive effort that's been made by Cuomo or whatever to pull the records, make the records unavailable for police officers. unless they conform. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, first of all, there are a lot of other ridiculous proposals out there right now to water down, our probation system and so forth. But, as of right now, our first responders, and this is not just police officers, we're talking about firefighters, EMTs, that if they are present at, say, in an accident, which turns out to be a crime of some sort, obviously many of them do, that they are now subject to the same, as witnesses now to that crime, are subject to the same discovery rules. And this is not only going to put them at risk unnecessarily, it is also going to reduce our ability to keep people in those positions, the volunteer positions. The vast majority of our first responders, whether it's firefighters, EMTs, are volunteers in upstate New York especially. The same thing with our law enforcement officials. They're not volunteers, but even our professional law enforcement officials should not be subject to these laws because it puts them in harm's way and at risk. And the fact that this is just another example of how this law has been, targeting law enforcement, targeting victims, and targeting the people that are out there every day on the front lines, saving lives and preventing crimes and preventing disasters from happening. So it's just egregious, and I hope that there is some small amount of common sense or sympathy in Albany very soon so that this changes.
So this is our speaking close this out, brother. Yes, we're going to do it. Yeah, exactly. We're going to put this. So this is our speaking Yes, we're going to do it. Yeah, exactly. We're going to put